I'm your host, Annie Bowles, and this is News du Jour. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the News du Jour. Quick reminder here at the top, tomorrow's episode will be your last one for the week, as I will be headed home for American Thanksgiving with my family. So thank you guys for your understanding, and be on the lookout for that Black Friday merch sale. I have another really fun announcement here at the top for you guys. So we have been charting on the US charts, on Canada's, as well as Norway. But just as of yesterday, we officially made it into the Netherlands top charts, only top 200, but it's still very exciting to be on anybody's charts, but especially countries that don't speak English as their main language, because obviously for our podcast in English to make its way to the top would be harder. So anyway, that's very exciting. Welcome to all of our Dutch listeners. I love Holland. I grew up in Brussels partially, so we spent some time over there, and it's a beautiful country, and thank you guys for listening. First up today, we are discussing the earthquake in Indonesia. So I do have to issue a content warning here. This isn't very graphic, but we will discuss some people's deaths. So the AP is showing that a severe 5.6 level earthquake in Indonesia killed at least 162 people, you guys, yesterday, with that death toll rising because it, again, just happened. So they're still sort of making their way through all of the disaster zone. 25 aftershocks were reported from this earthquake, and the earthquake itself lasted 10 seconds, which, of course, that doesn't seem very long in the course of a day, but for an actual earthquake to keep going for 10 seconds is very long. It knocked cars off of roads, it destroyed hundreds of buildings, caused landslides, and downed power lines. The quake actually occurred in a pretty rural area of Indonesia, but that didn't make it any less destructive. Several school buildings actually collapsed during the quake, and that's where many of the deaths actually occurred. Luckily, though, it was just students who were staying after hours, and school was not actually in session at the time. About 13,000 homes were also damaged in the earthquake, to the point where people had to be taken to an evacuation center for the night. The hospital itself was actually damaged too, so it wasn't even the best location for those injured to kind of congregate. Patients were being treated out in the streets, laying on pillows on the ground with IVs just hanging everywhere. Officials and residents are currently searching for anyone who may be trapped in the rubble. They worked through the night, but sadly, sometimes just did not have the tools or the resources needed to reach trapped loved ones. And that leads us right into our next story. So wealthy countries have now made a pledge to help pay for climate disaster relief for poorer countries. So it's long been lobbied for wealthier countries to help establish a fund to help poorer countries with climate change disaster relief, as they will face, much more dire consequences of climate change, and they simply have fewer resources and less infrastructure to deal with them. In the past, the US has really shied away from this in concept, but now as the results of climate change are becoming more and more real, we've changed our tune. There are tangible ways for the US to make a difference around the world when these disasters strike. For example, an excavator or other tools could have pulled more trapped people out of the rubble in Indonesia just yesterday. We could save mothers, babies, grandfathers, teachers, farmers, fishermen. We all need to work together through this crisis. And now, nearly 200 countries have worked out a deal this past Sunday to help with ongoing disaster relief. So the specifics are very murky right now. Nothing has been hammered out. But this loss and damage fund is certainly a step in the right direction. More developed nations really brought this havoc upon our planet with our extreme carbon emissions, and poorer countries will bear the brunt of the crisis. So while many hurdles remain, this gets the ball rolling. Congress will have the ultimate sign-off, of course, as they are in charge of the purse strings, so stay tuned on that. And next up for today, we're going to discuss some stories to do with the war in Ukraine. First up, Russian protests are being smothered. So according to an Amnesty International press release, the Russian government is cracking down on media and protesters like never before. They're monitoring journalists to make sure that stories about the protests don't leave Russia. According to Amnesty, the Russian government is using the usual, quote, arbitrary arrests, force, detentions, and heavy fines, end quote, against anyone trying to get the story out about these protests. Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, there is word of potential war crimes happening, but on the opposite side of the conflict. As we know, Russia has been committing what appear to be war crimes of massive proportions since they invaded. However, there is a murky circumstance surrounding videos of an execution of Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Photos and videos are circulating online, but they did make their way into Russian media outlets, which, of course, that made it in, but the protests didn't. They seem to show the before and after of the killing of 11 unarmed Russian soldiers at very close range. The footage was reportedly, quote unquote, verified by the New York Times, but it still leaves a lot of questions. Could they have been, they being the videos, could they have been falsified or staged in some way and put out by Russia? And if not, what does that mean about the legitimacy of this war if war crimes are being committed on both sides? Also, it definitely goes against what President Zelensky had promised, that Russian soldiers who were captured would be treated with dignity. Instead, were they killed without a second thought? If this did happen the way it looks like it did, it certainly was a war crime. That said, Putin's forces seem to have committed war crimes on such levels it's actually unthinkable. Dropping bombs on playgrounds and apartment buildings, torturing, murdering, raping, and more. So it's hard for him to throw stones. But these very Russian soldiers could have been the ones perpetuating those war crimes themselves. But it doesn't really give Ukrainians a carte blanche to commit whatever heinous acts they want to against the Russians. Hopefully, President Zelensky will stand up and condemn these actions if they are in fact real. And that is the news du jour. Today, I wanted to leave you guys with the quote, "There is no key to happiness. The door is always open." If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on whatever podcast platform you use to listen. A rate and review or shout out on social media would mean the world to us and help us be able to keep creating the news du jour. But the best way to support all of our work is to become a patron at www.patreon.com/sugarfreemedia. You can also follow us on social media under sugarfreemedia.co on Instagram and just sugarfreemedia, all one word, on TikTok. We appreciate you listening and look forward to telling you about the news again next time on News du Jour.
Broadcasting from Oklahoma.